Today, the Governor and the Reserve Board met and kept interest rates on hold for another month. Now, they're continuing to stay at record low levels where the cash rate remains at 2%. Now, for a first in this commentary series that you may have seen or may not seen before, I'm going to actually cut to some audio of Glenn Stevens presenting at the Australian Economics Group luncheon. Now, it's an important luncheon, this one, because it's all the economists around Australia who come along and listen to what the Governor has to say about the economy. So there's two sections that I want us to listen to, and then I'll make some comments around each of those sections for this video. So let's listen to Glenn Stevens right now.
We've seen a period of somewhat disappointing, though hardly disastrous, economic growth. And we have inflation that's been well contained, and that's seen interest rates fall to very, very low levels, the lowest levels in my lifetime and in most of us here. As I've said before, the question of whether they might fall further has to remain on the table at this point. But in answering that question, it isn't good enough, really, just to say that if we get continuing evidence of softness, then necessarily interest rates should fall further without considering the longer-term risks that may bring.
So what is Glenn Stevens talking about when he refers to the risk associated with lower interest rates? Well, it's very clear that he and the board are very concerned about asset price risk. So are asset values getting beyond their fair and medium price point? If they are, what can they do about this? And this is where APRA is stepping in. And what APRA are doing is behind the scenes, they're approaching each of the lenders and they're giving them an ultimatum. Either we come in with a big hard stick and hit you, or you go and stop people borrowing money for investment purposes. So what we're going to see is letters coming out to all of us mortgage holders, and we're going to see interest rate increases next month around investment lending. In fact, with some lenders, we're actually going to see anyone who's holding an interest-only loan to be slugged a higher interest rate. And slug is the right word. I am disappointed with the approach of APRA in regards to what they're doing around trying to curb investment lending, because some lenders don't have the capability inside their systems to determine whether it's investment lending or whether it's owner-occupied lending. So those lenders are actually just saying if you've got an interest-only loan, you're going to pay a higher interest rate. And that's unacceptable to me for existing lenders. Because if I bought a property some 3 or 5 years ago as an investment property, I'm now being told that I'm going to have to pay a premium on interest because I'm an investor in property. Now, I think that's poor form. What I would have liked to have seen was some further commentary in the marketplace about the risks of investing in property. And the fact of the matter is that if you're investing in property in some markets at the moment, you can expect to have very little growth or potentially a correction in the value of your property in the next couple of years if you've bought poorly. So that's the risk element. So with APRA doing this, it's going to allow the Reserve Governor and the board to potentially move on interest rates to a lower level if he feels they need to. Now, the other part that's given him confidence to be able to do that is the inflation rate. The inflation data came out a couple of weeks back also, with underlying inflation around 2.3%. Now, that's at the lower range. Now, being at the lower range means that the Governor is not concerned about inflationary pressures at any point. Now I want to get on to the second part of his speech. Now, you can actually watch the full version of his speech, and we'll give you a link on this site to the full version of the speech where you hear him speak for the whole main presentation. But the second part of this speech I want to highlight is where he starts to just discuss the concept of the Australian economy moving at trend growth. Now, trend growth is around 3.25%. Now, why is trend growth in terms of GDP growth so important? Well, it's a common belief that when we've got trend growth, we've got full employment, which means that everyone who wants to work has the capacity and will work. So that's an important measure. But what's been interesting about the Australian economy, which has still been growing reasonably healthy at 2.5%, is that the expectations around unemployment growing actually hasn't happened. So because it hasn't happened, the Reserve Governor and the board are now saying, is this the new norm? Now, they're not saying that completely, but they're starting to open the conversation up. And remember, he's talking to a group of economists around understanding what their thoughts are so they can have a collaboration approach to whether they see this as being the case. So it's an interesting point. If now that the Australian economy is going to grow at 2.5%. What does that mean for the broader economy? What does that mean for tax revenues? What does that mean for interest rates? So there is a delicate position here in terms of whether interest rates are going to go down, and the Australian dollar is going to play a big part of that. If the Australian dollar continues to drop, and if we see a 6 in front of the Australian dollar, even if it's late sixes like 68, 69 cents, then in reality, maybe the governor is saying that's low enough and we don't need to drop interest rates any further. So let's take a listen to this second part of his speech.
Firstly, I would say the economy is making the adjustments we need it to make, a bit more slowly than we would prefer, but it is making them. Secondly, if the slow growth of wages has in fact been a net saver of jobs, so if the reconciliation of the labour force and output data are partly because of slower wages, well, that would appear to indicate a degree of labour market flexibility in operation. Thirdly, to the extent that the data are hinting that our assumptions about trend growth may need to be revisited, and I'm not saying that that is the right conclusion, but if it turned out that way, that's going to be worth some discussion. It need not be the case, of course, that per capita growth would be any lower if the reason for lower overall growth is simply lower population growth. So there may be no particular implications for living standards as measured by income per head. But if there were assumptions about absolute growth rates embedded in, say, business strategies or fiscal strategies or retirement income plans, then they'd need to be re-examined.
So it's interesting times ahead for the Australian economy. Glenn Stevens, I think, is very good at sort of keeping his options open, and so he should. We still can't forget that we've been under this amazing journey of almost 25 years of positive economic growth with no recessions since the early 90s. An amazing result. But there might be some headwinds that are going to see us potentially slow as an economy, which is going to make some big tough decisions for both federal and state governments around what they do to help us get through this period. So it's interesting times ahead, and that's why I wanted to make sure that you could understand from the horse's mouth in regards to Glenn Stevens' commentary around this. So stay tuned for further updates because it's going to be really important to see where we go with this. One thing is for sure is that we'll probably see low interest rates like we are seeing now, these historical low interest rates, for a longer period of time until we actually see the global economy pick up, and then we see obviously the Australians taking part in that global economy. So you would probably think lower interest rates for longer. Will they go lower in terms of another 25 basis points? Well, APRA has done some work to allow the Governor and the Board to make that decision by trying to hopefully contain the asset price bubble that may occur in the property market. So it's going to be interesting times ahead. Thanks for watching.